Check, check, check. All right, I guess I can take these off. How we doing, guys? Today is Friday, November 10th. It is Veterans Day. So for all veterans friends, my friends who are veterans, I want to say thank you for your sacrifice. I know a lot of times we say thank you for your service a lot, but it is something that I'll be turning 43. The great old age of 43. I was born in the 1900s. I'm going to be turning 43. When I was getting out of high school is when a lot of my friends were going overseas and they were serving the United States. Now, one of the things that oftentimes gets thrown around is, was it worth it? Were we sending them to worthy causes? And ultimately, when I say Happy Veterans Day, it has nothing to do with that. It's saying everything. It's saying everything about the sacrifice that I've seen in my friends who came back. You're still a young. I'm still a youngling. I try to be a youngling as much as I can, avoiding that Anakin Skywalker in the Jedi Temple. But yeah, I just want to say thank you to all the veterans and to the families of veterans. If you were waiting and you didn't know, that you've done a lot of service too. So just want to start today off. Thank you, my veterans, my friends who are veterans. Actually, Jared McKee, he is a veteran. He was a former Marine, former police chief. He and I started the Breathwork Tactics program, which is growing, and I'm really proud of this program. It's been the dream of people who are in the breathwork space, health and wellness space. It's been the dream to bring breathwork to communities of service, of public service, first responders. And oftentimes it gets kind of batted down, and there are sometimes good reasons, right? So sometimes the way something is presented, it might be incredibly, and please don't take this the wrong way, but sometimes I think we all know breath work is presented in either some sort of what we might consider to be woo-woo, right? Or ultra spiritual. I guess what's that one guy's name with the ultra spiritual channel? Or it's presented in a way that can oftentimes make an audience not want to get involved because they don't want to get into spirituality, or they don't want to get into I don't know, whatever, right? They don't want to do yoga. And so what happened back in 2020 was that Jared got a hold of me and he said, "Hey, I'm a police chief and there's a lot of things going on in the world. There's a lot of need. And I just read your first book." He didn't say it was my first book. At the time, it was my book. Now it was my first book. A Practical Guide to Breathwork. And he said, this is what our people need. We have incredibly high rates of suicide. We have incredibly high rates of burnout. And of course, we need to learn how to control ourselves and really work on our focus and our ability to make better decisions in the heat of the moment, right? So he laid it all out, and he said, let's work together. And he said, the worst thing you can do, and of course, I was a breath worker. I've been doing it at that point, maybe 5 years professionally. And I had things in my mind. And this is where a lot of times, a lot of people reach out to me who are breath workers, who they say, "Hey, I want to do the breathwork tactics thing." And this is why we only certify, as of right now, we only certify first responders for the breathwork tactics program, because he told me, he's like, the first thing you got to know is don't pretend you know what our life is like. Don't pretend you know anything about, what our life is like, or what he gave me some reading. There's there's a book called Emotional Survival for First Responders, or I forget exactly what the name of it was, but it was written like in depth as far as it was mostly about it was law enforcement was the name of it, because that's he was a former police chief, or he's a police chief at the time. So he invited me in, and I did an enormous amount of listening, and I didn't go in there telling everybody, "Yeah, well, we got to do this kind of technique or that kind of, this is what's wrong." And so we've been able to develop a really great program that I'm really proud of, and it's growing. We just certified one of our brothers out in Utah. We've got this, actually, if you become a police officer and you're becoming a police officer in Indianapolis, Indiana. So this is the biggest city in Indiana. It's one of the biggest cities in the country. Any police officer that goes through that police academy, they learn breathwork tactics. So they learn about their nervous system. They learn about their how their breath influences that. They learn functional breathing. They learn a lot of things that they can use, not just, when they wake up and have, some time to do the thing, right? What do you do on the way to the call? What do you do on the way back to the call? How do you go home to your family after a full day or after a crazy day? A lot of those things. So I'm really proud of that program. And Jared is a veteran, and I was really, really fortunate to meet him. So to all my veteran friends, a big thank you. Today we celebrate it in the United States, Veterans Day. Technically, it's tomorrow. But anytime we have a holiday that's on a weekend, we try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. We want a 3-day weekend. Have your 3-day weekend. Hey, Dana. Hey, Moose Mans. Hey, Paul. Nice to have you guys here. So today is a rough time right now, right now for me. So I want to talk a little bit about, but before I get into that, I want to talk about the poll. So if you haven't seen, so I did a poll. I'm always curious as to what kind of people are tuning in and what the audience looks like. And I asked the question, are you more traditional or are you more progressive? And I defined these things because these words can be, really, they can be kind of anything. So I was like, do you look to the wisdom of the past? Is that something you value? Do you value the wisdom of the past? Or is it that you are always looking for something new, or not always looking for something new, but you are looking for new ways of thinking, and you value change? And this audience, of course, did not disappoint. We're pretty much at 50-50. And a lot of people made comments about, I look at the wisdom of the past, but I also am trying to figure new things out. And, I get that. I don't know. How do you guys feel about that? That's one of those concepts where sometimes a person asks this or that type of a question. And, as with most things in life, the answers are complicated. There's a gray area in between. And so I often look at myself, especially lately, I've been looking at myself as, I do value an enormous amount of just traditional thinking. I obviously, it's obvious that I am a person who looks for new ways of thinking. This is just something that, I think I just naturally have been this way. I was a humanities major, I was an English professor, an art type person. So art people are generally when you look at the big attributes that a person has psychologically, their openness is very high. So my openness is very high. But there's a lot of beauty to traditional wisdom. And that is, I think, oftentimes there's a reason why those traditions have lasted. A lot of times I've heard people talk about traditions as, old people telling you what to do even after they're dead. Right. And I get that. But but a lot of times there's a reason for it. Right. And so I think it's important to examine these things. Of course, Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. They put him to death for that. Right. But what he was saying is he was examining the traditions. He was examining the ways of life. And he was finding that that often nobody was really examining these things. Right. Of course, I do these things. That's just the way. That's just the way things are. That's just the way. Um, that's just what we do. And so it's fascinating because I look at so much, and if you've read my new book, even if you read my old book, I talked about the modern human condition versus the conditions of our ancestors. Those people, they lived through a lot of stuff, right? Yeah, exactly, Paul. It's not a quick answer type of a question, and I posed it as such. So I so I apologize. I put are you this or are you that? And of course, this audience, I loved how often a lot of people chose one, right? So it was like 49-51. I think 51% was they identified as people who value change and look for new ways of thinking. So it was, but I mean, it was pretty much 50-50. But it is something that you have to say, okay, we're here thousands of years. Human beings have been here for thousands of years. There's a few things that probably were valuable, and of course, if you're one of my newest, okay, if you want to write it down, John Vervaeke. I don't know if you're familiar with this guy. Oh my God, I've been listening to his lectures. I'm in deep study right now. So I'm in deep study. I'm in mourning right now too. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But I'm in deep study right now. The Language of Breath book. When I finished writing that, I didn't finish being fascinated with all of the things that it brought up. And so, yeah, Jean Vervaeke discusses the concept of psychotechnologies. And for instance, the psychotechnology of writing or the psychotechnology of rhetoric or things of that nature. And so there's things that persist because they've gotten us further along. There's also, I think, sometimes whenever there's psychotechnologies or philosophies or maybe systems of thinking that are antiquated, and it's like, well, this obviously doesn't work anymore. If you read my book, I talked about the concept of, which was the longest held. This is crazy, right? So listen to this. This is the longest held view in medicine, right? So if you were a physician for 2,500 years, and we're talking from the time of Hippocrates, pretty much, to the time of like the mid 1800s when they discovered germ theory. So we're talking about the vast majority of I guess known history. We viewed the human organism as through the lens of humorism, right? So, and no one, and we revered this guy, Galen of Pergamon. Now, Galen of Pergamon was not an idiot. It's just that he was wrong. Okay. Galen didn't invent humorism, but he was incredibly well funded, and he really wanted to help people. And he had access to a lot of things that most people didn't have access to. He's the one who named the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so we're talking about a person who we still use his terminology today. He's also the one who he didn't invent bloodletting, but he's the one who really popularized bloodletting. So he influenced us a lot. And there are times when it's like, okay, and a lot of doctors for 2,500 years said, well, we know this is true because Galen said it's true. Well, I guess Galen was more like, I think he was like, just like, I forgot, oh man, off the top of my head, it was like pretty much, like, I think he was AD. So it wasn't like 2,500 years maybe from Galen, but Galen solidified it. And we're talking about Galen, his ideas influenced, for instance, in the United States, our first president was named George Washington. George Washington, the cause of death that was listed for George Washington was throat infection, I think it was. But his method of treatment was basically straight out of Galen. Okay. So we're talking about someone who died around the year, somewhere around the year 1800, who was that physician for the president of the United States was using something that was over 1,000 years of science that was over 1,000 years old. They did bloodletting on George Washington. And apparently they drained him of like 2/3 of his blood. Like it was just ridiculous. And they're like, cause of death. It was definitely that sore throat that he came in with. I mean, oh man. Hey, let's take a look at some of these things. I'm gonna get to some of the other stuff here in just a minute, but I'm so glad you're here today. I really appreciate you guys. And hey, I'm really dedicated to getting more back into doing these weekly lives. So today I have a dermatologist appointment. That's pretty sexy, isn't it? At my usual time. So I decided, hey, let's see if we can do a little early. So I'm so glad you're here. And hey, Sam, thank you so much for that feedback. See, Sam says, thanks, Jesse. Appreciate the long speech format. You know what? So for the longest time, when I started this channel a long time ago, I mean, so much has changed. I have changed in so many ways. I've grown up. I have changed my outlook in so many different ways, and YouTube's changed. The world's changed. And I realized that I like to discuss sometimes the greater depths. And I want to try to give an opportunity for people just to kind of hang, and this is something I'm going to get into in here in a minute. And then I have to immediately leave to go have someone look at my skin to see if I don't think I have, don't worry, but do not worry. I want to encourage everyone to, do preventative care, right? So I'm going to go, I'm not an expert on what dots should be on my skin. So I'm going to a person I trust. Anyway, so don't worry. I don't think I have, melanoma or something like that. But I do appreciate that feedback on the new format. And I think we're going to take the audio and we're going to put it on Spotify. So if you want to just kind of listen along, or if people want to listen along, I want us to be able to hang. I want, so often in this world, and I experience it a lot, especially after I left education, there's a lot of good and bad in public education. I was an English professor for 11 years, and, I could do a whole episode on that. Maybe I will. But one of the beautiful things about it was at least you're around people all the time. And while you're not always around people you really want to be around, there is a great value in that. And so I want to try to help, spread just the vibe, if nothing else. I don't know if that's a perfect word for it, but just the feeling of, hey, look, we're people, we're human beings. It doesn't have to be all cuts and this and that. As much as I like cuts and all of these things too, we've gotten into this now where everybody's doing short content, and I've got to try to do that too. When you're trying to promote a message or a business, there's certain avenues you're like, well, at least, okay, we'll try it. We'll cut these things up, we'll put them out there. Maybe it'll help people. But I prefer a good conversation. So I appreciate that a lot. Paul says the Language of Breath is a phenomenal book. Well, hey, thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. A quick squirrel. Are you getting sidetracked already? A quick type of question. How often would you recommend doing Wim Hof method on top of the awareness exercise and the CO2 tolerance exercises? Wow. Okay. And that's not a quick answer either, but it is and it isn't. So here's the thing. One of the things that when it comes to, I was talking about growing, and one of the things that I've come to understand is that there's no, that if you do, like, I'm formulating. Bear with me. I'm formulating my answer, my response. So Wim Hof method, right? Some people might say, okay, so what is that? I mean, ultimately, you have a breathing technique, which is it's circular breathing and breath holds. There's nothing magical about it. It's been around for thousands of years, and there's a lot of good to it. And then there's cold training, right? So I'm not sure if you're referring to both of those things or not. Let's just suppose you are, because hey, if you weren't, then here's even more answer than you ask for. You're getting to know me, Paul. I pretty much am gonna when I teach, so I do the language of breath certification. So I no longer represent, for instance, the Wim Hof method, or I don't represent any of these other certifications. I've created my own certification that and you have to believe in what you do. You have to believe in what you do, and that hey, this is the best I think that I can come up with. And I think it's the best thing for people and my clients and things. So that is what the language of breath is all about. And so I do certify people in that. And when I do, it was funny earlier this year. So we do a lot. We do about 3 months every week. We do a Zoom for 2 hours. You talk about hanging out with me. You get to know me too well. But and then we do an in-person retreat. And so we there was this one student, and she was asking a question, and every time she asked the question, I answered a question she didn't ask. and eventually she was like, she reiterated the question where I'm like, oh, okay, so I just answered like 3 questions you weren't trying to ask. so here it comes. So for instance, cold training is something that I would say you don't have, generally you don't want to combine it with any kind of breath work, in my opinion. So this is coming from all my experience and things. The way that you do cold training, and hey, maybe there is a third book. Actually, it's not a third book. I'm actually going to publish. I'm completely rewriting, not rewriting, but I mean, it's a huge revision of my first actual ebook, which was a practical guide to cold training. I'm updating it insane amounts, like a lot of research is putting into this, and I have a lot of work to do. So, the strain, that is going to be coming out hopefully next year. But when it comes to cold training, ideally, I don't think cold training is about, sometimes what a lot of people look at it as. I think cold training is an opportunity to get to know your unconscious. And this is a language of breath principle. And the thing is, when we engage in the cold, the hypothalamus is going to pick that up, and there are preset strategies that we all are born with. This is fascinating. Of course, I've been down this rabbit. I'm just going down rabbit holes after rabbit holes. So the hypothalamus comes up. There are preset strategies of avoidance in your hypothalamus, and this is when you're too hot or when you're too cold. And what happens is those are activated, and they're coming from it's an unconscious process, right? This is all, to me, it's all about getting to your unconscious. Papa Geek, good to see you, brother. Hey, less tan lines, more frost patterns. So when it comes to cold training, for me, the ideal way to do it is to understand that you're getting to know the unconscious messaging. It's ultimately learning to befriend a part of yourself, not this control thing, not this. It's literally saying, wow, a part of me is a absolute monster in a good way, right? Like I have so much that I don't even acknowledge as me. And that is what my unconscious is capable of doing in the cold. And it's going to send up to the conscious. And you're also going to have unconscious messages that are really, they're going to paint the picture of where you are and your situation. And it's going to feel terrible, right? Beast mode, exactly. Exactly. And it's painting the picture of your surroundings. And this is something that is a great opportunity to train yourself for times when you're going to be under stress that is not under your control, because you can always turn off the cold shower. You can always get out of the ice bath, unless you're doing it all wrong. Please do, if you want to know how to get into a cold training practice, you can buy my ebook off my website. And then once I do release the final edition of that ebook, you'll get a refreshed ebook. So you get a free copy of the ebook copy of the final book that I'm going to be doing. So if you want, I have this thing called the rules of cold training. The primary rule is that you have to be in a controlled environment. So that means no going out and doing all the stupid bullshit that I did. Pardon my French there, but no doing all the stupid stuff that I did. I almost killed myself so many ways. Like the cold is, it will kill you. And I almost got killed. I remember one time it was the first time I went out and I got into a moving creek, and I had my brother-in-law was standing there, and my ego got the best of me, and I stayed in a moving creek. And I'm telling you, this water was just barely liquid. I mean, it was, if it were any colder, it would just be a solid block of ice. And it was moving. And I sat there for 10 minutes. And, it got to the part where I was just miserable. And then I was okay. And that's actually another thing in the book that I talk about. You start to think, oh, I have mastered the cold. I am amazing. And then what's really happening is you're basically going into hypothermia and you don't even know it. So, and Moose Bands, I will go into great depth with my experiences as a teacher. There's a lot. And I know that was a quick switch. I'm not even done talking about Paul's question, but I will do that, Moose Bands. You're going to get a lot of info on that. I wanted to not talk about it. I like to not talk about something until I've got some distance from it. Like, for instance, I freely talk about the fact I was an opioid addict for 10 years of my life. But I didn't talk about that for 10 years after. I never told anybody for 10 full years after I was done with that addiction. I made sure I had 10 years absolutely 100% clean. And the first time I mentioned it was in my book, A Practical Guide to Breathwork. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to even tell anybody then, because I didn't want these labels. I don't like that. After that, everybody looks at you weird and they talk to you funny. And it's like, are you sure you can have a beer? I'm like, shut up. It's cool, man. Anyway. But yeah, what I would say, Paul, when it comes to circular breathing and when it comes to breath holds, these are ways that the vast majority of the breathwork world uses to not feel, to quiet the unconscious in ways that in many cases, I don't think is profitable in the long run. And you'll often see a person become more irritable and less in touch with themselves if they just breathe, don't focus on any sensations, physical sensations, just breathe, focus on your breath only. And I used to preach that because that's what I was taught. And initially I felt a lot of peace, but when you practice, for instance, Paul, go to the part where I talk about the hypoxic focused awareness exercise. So that's basically how I'm not saying I fixed it, but that is my purview. It's because you're still doing breath holds, you're still doing circular breathing, but it's metered, and it's metered for a reason. When we do hyperventilative breath work, oftentimes your breath gets real haphazard and we get sloppy, and we get into these states where afterwards we're actually more out of sorts, and we don't realize it, because when you overbreathe, when you do hyperventilative breath work, you're activating your sympathetic nervous system. And one of the results of that is that you get a lot of endorphins. And this is why a lot of people love hyperventilative breath work. I love hyperventilative breath work, and the endorphins are a part of that. But if you're doing something just for the endorphins, and that seems to be one of the trends that I see, nobody says it. People will sell it as a lot of other things, but it's one way to get an endorphin rush. And so what I say is definitely go ahead and do it. I every morning, I do what, if you look at my book, I do what is called the hypoxic focused awareness exercise in. I do that regularly, and there's a long breath hold. There's a lot of the things that are similar to Bhastrika Kumbhaka Pranayama, which is what all of this stuff is based off of. But the main focus is interoception. And so take a look at that. If you've been doing the awareness exercise, that is the king. And the awareness exercise can take you all the way to the listening exercise. And if you're getting into the listening exercise, that's when my clients have these amazing, profound experiences. You might have waking dreams. You might suddenly understand, hey, this is why I've been feeling the way I've been feeling. You might have aha moments. It's really, really profound. And so definitely do that. And if you bought the book, there's a QR code where it will take you to a hidden website. Well, it's not a hidden website. It's a hidden page on my website where you can experience the listening exercise, and I guide you through it, at least a 15-minute version of it. For longer than that, you need to talk to a licensed language of breath worker. Anyway, thank you for that question. And if you're into CO2 tolerance training, if you're into hyperventilative breath work, if you're into hypoxia focused breath work, whatever kind of breath work you're interested in, that's a part of the language of breath, because all breathing is part of this language, right? And so it's not like there's a specific, and this is one of the big arguments I make in the book. You're not a machine that needs certain codes to be punched in. That's kind of how I felt about breath work early on. I've heard a lot of people say, if you know how to do breath work, you've got a remote control, or I go deep into this part of the thing with my breath. And the reality is, you can send and receive signals, but you have to understand you have to know how to decipher it, right? You have to have a cipher for any language to work. And that's what the book is all about. I give you a cipher and it's okay, here's how to start getting this sort of thing. And anyway, thank you for that. All right, let's see here. The first rule of ice bath is you have to talk incessantly about it. It's like Fight Club, right? And there's been a lot of good comedy about that. And I think that, ice bathing, sauna, those are two things that we need. They're incredibly popular, but they're very misunderstood. And a lot of the time we look at things as it's good for me or bad for me. It's a lot like the poll. Like I am certainly not innocent when it comes to making these mistakes, right? And that's how I always looked at it myself. I used to take an ice bath every day because it's good for me. I don't do that anymore. I generally cold shower no matter what, because that's what a shower is, right? Why would you make it all hot and sweaty and uncomfortable? and so believe me, when it comes to, we have to learn how to listen. And the more I've listened, the healthier I've become, the happier I've become, and the more in touch with myself and my emotions, and the more empathetic I've become. And I only have a few more minutes and then I have to head out. But I wanted to right now, I think something, and I've got an episode coming up. It should be either at the end of this month. I recorded it a couple days ago. My very close uncle. So my uncle, he's always been there in my entire life, a part of my life, a pillar of my life. He died yesterday, and he was just this. I mean, we all have these people that are just kind of like pillars in your life. And here I am, 43. And I've lost a few people, in my life before. And I lost all my grandparents rather young. But this one really hit hard. It really hit hard. It was interesting. I've got an episode where I talk about this, and maybe I might have a poem. Okay. You're going to hang with me on this. Okay. This new format, I'm going to turn you into warrior poets. Are you familiar with that concept? The concept of a Renaissance person or a warrior poet, someone who is in touch with their emotions, intellect, and physicality as much as possible, right? So that is what I'm interested in. I'm absolutely interested in that. So yeah, okay, we got some love there, and thank you so much, Moose Mans, and Dana, and thank you so much for the condolences. But it was interesting because I've lived this long. I'm 42. I turned 43 later. I'd never had the opportunity to say goodbye. You know, to actually say goodbye. And my uncle, I can't say how blessed and he was, because I mean, to have the ability, because he was very cognizant, very aware, and he knew that he was going to die, and he was like, okay, make sure these people come. And of course, I was on that list because this guy, we got into shenanigans when I was a kid. I mean, hilarious memories. Um, and so we were able to say goodbye. Now, we don't always get that opportunity, but I'd never done that before. I'd never seen that happen before, where literally at the end, I'll see you again, Jesse. And I watched my father, and now see, I was in and out of tears because, and there's nothing. It was one of those things. But my dad, man, oh, that guy, he was solid, and it was in a good way. Not like I'm not gonna feel like he was very present. He was able to say his goodbyes to his brother, and I just never seen that before. I'd never seen that. Um, and so one of the blessings of suffering, and of course we all want to, I think so much of the world, it has this uh we have this avoidance of wanting to suffer, and no one wants to suffer, but I think there is a great benefit in those times when we do, if we allow ourselves to say, I'm going to move through this, and I'm going to also bring something with me. I'm going to remember that my suffering is the suffering of everyone else. I'm not the only person to lose someone close to me, right? We all do, right? And so this has been just like a lot of other sufferings. I've shared on this channel. My wife and I, we were working to adopt two little girls, absolutely wonderful little girls. We had them in our home for about a year. So I mean, they were calling us daddy and mommy and things. There was a sudden decision. They got taken away. That was, oh my God, absolutely tore my heart apart. But something I really want to say, because and of course I'm going through it right now. I'm going through mourning, right? It's important to go through these mourning times, right? So much of the time we just want to get back to the party, but it's important. And because it allows you to feel humanity to other people. Language of Breath is all about having a positive relationship with yourself. And there's a part of me that's dying. And I understand that. A part of me that is like, wait a minute, the way things are has to change now. This very big pillar of your life is no longer there. So a part of me is dying. A part of me, my uncle will always be with me. But the beauty is that because I'm allowing myself to really feel this, my heart is growing. I treat everyone I see nicer now, because you never know what someone's going through. And it's an intellectual thing that people say a lot of times. You'll hear people say this, hey, you got to be nice to people. You don't know what they're going through. And, you're like, oh, well, what, and sometimes we say, yes, that's so true, right? There's a difference between feeling something and knowing something intellectually, right? There's a difference between, I know that the pyramids of Giza exist. I have never seen them, touched them, felt them, right? I have yet to travel the world. I would love to. And if anybody wants to invite me over to go see the pyramids, I would love to. I've seen Chichen Itza. I thought that was amazing. But the point is, these times of suffering can be times of immense growth. And that is the blessing that comes with it. Because as I am in loss, I'm also able to share more of the love that I know other people need. Because, geez, guys, we have to, we're all, we have, I mean, we've we are often on this planet and we're so inwardly focused that we forget, we're all just on this rock floating in space. Like, I mean, so I just wanted to share that. And I appreciate all the kind comments here. And so Paul also got to say goodbye. That's such I've never had that happen. Like my grandparents, like two of my grandparents, they died when I was really young. And then two of my other grandparents, like they just weren't cognitive, they didn't recognize me. Like they called me by my cousin's name. It was one of these things where I got to, I didn't even say goodbye because you weren't really able to have that conversation. And so, you know, getting to see a person and he knew he was going to die. Like it was one of those things where it was an immense peace that he had. And I don't think that's something, I don't think that's something to expect. I think it's something to cultivate and do the work for. I think we have to do the work in order to be that peaceful. And I will say, my uncle, my father, deeply religious men and have incredible faith, and they credit that to their confidence and, hey, I'll see you again. And it's so powerful. It's such an inspirational, a beautiful thing. And so, it's Friday, and maybe it's not that I want everybody to have a happy Friday, but I want you to be so much more happy because you're getting to live a memory now. I brought pictures to my uncle's bedside because I'm the type of person who I will get choked up. I get moved emotionally. There's two times I get moved emotionally to cry. One, great loss. Okay. Two, great beauty. So I went to see Sigur Rós, cried the whole time. I don't know. I'm an artist guy, right? So I'm into. I'm the kind of guy who gets goosebumps whenever there are, you hear that one song. That one song that you get the goosebumps. Oh my God, I get the goosebumps. Anyway, live that. Yeah, but there you go. Let's start it right now. Let's live that memory now because you are living in your memories. Like someday this will be a memory, whatever today is. And so even if it's not this, oh, I want to travel the world and I need to have these things, so often we get distracted in that. But just think, I'm living a memory now. So I kissed my wife and hugged my wife extra close, yesterday. Okay. So my son, he really needed more study time for his spelling test. And we did a lot of spelling test study last night, but I made sure we're going to go. It was warm. It was a nice warm night. It was abnormally warm. So we went to the park and rode bicycles, things like that are just really important to recognize. This will be a memory someday, but I get to live it now. The pictures that we wish we could sometimes, man, I wish I could go back to that day. We're living those days. And so, it's important, I think, to sometimes reframe that as we go. Anyway, guys, I appreciate you listening to me and I appreciate you hang out with me. And all of these comments make me feel amazing. And I cannot wait to do this again. So thank you guys so much. I've got to go to my I've got to go to my dermatologist. She's going to check me out, make sure I don't have anything on my skin. I don't think I do. Again, no worries should be in your hearts. But thank you. But no, I'm going to go get checked out because, hey, and you should too, be prudent with your health. We don't get to be here forever, but there are things we can do to stay here a little longer. Guys, thanks so much. Happy Friday. Happy Veterans Day to all my veteran friends. And I will see you next week. Bye-bye.